Do you believe in any gods right now? Or maybe nothing at all? Either way, an ancient Greek would have found that question deeply strange. Because for them, believing in the gods was never a choice. The gods were simply there. Like the sun rising, like the wind blowing, like your neighbor existing next door. It wasn't a matter of faith. It was a matter of reality. Most of what we think we know about ancient Greek religion is wrong. Zeus, Hera, Aphrodite, Poseidon. We know the names, but the names are the least important part. What actually matters is how the Greeks treated these gods. How these gods breathed and moved inside their daily lives. And once you understand that, the ancient Greek world starts to look like a completely different place. Let's start with the most surprising thing. Ancient Greece had no Bible, no Quran, no founder who received commandments directly from a god and wrote them down. No central church running things. No pope deciding what was right and what was wrong. So how did this religion survive? How did so many people, across so many centuries, worship the same gods and share the same mythological traditions? The answer is simple. It was passed down through living. The way a grandmother tells her grandchildren stories. The way a whole village sings together at a festival. The way a father shows his son how to make an offering at the altar. Life carried the religion forward, not books. And what that means is this. Athens and Sparta could worship the same gods in completely different ways. Like two cities that share the same language, but speak in different accents. Each Greek city had its own way of talking to the divine. So anyone who tries to describe ancient Greek religion as one single, unified thing is drawing you a map and calling it the real world. A map is just a simplified version of something far messier and more unpredictable. What we're doing here today is the same. This is a map. The actual religious life of ancient Greece was richer and stranger than anything we can neatly summarize. But even through all that complexity, one thing stays clear. The Greek gods were human. Not all-knowing, not all-powerful. Not the kind of perfect and transcendent being you find in Christianity. Zeus got angry. Hera burned with jealousy. Aphrodite let love cloud her judgment. Ares was obsessed with war. These gods had human emotions, fought with each other, lied, took revenge, fell in love. They even got involved with mortals. Some people look at this and think Greek mythology seems almost childish. How can a god be jealous? How can a god cheat? Isn't this just primitive storytelling? But think about it for a second, and you realize this is actually a remarkably honest way of seeing the world. Because the world really is unfair. Good people die young, bad people thrive. You work hard, and the drought comes anyway. You pray, and the war comes anyway. If a perfect, all-knowing God is running everything, how do you explain all that? The Greeks answered that question head-on. The gods disagree with each other. The gods act on their feelings. And that's exactly why the world is this chaotic. Think about the Trojan War. While Achilles fought on the battlefield, the gods up above were picking sides. Athena backed the Greeks. Aphrodite backed Troy. Zeus tried to stay in the middle, but couldn't quite keep his own emotions out of it. A modern audience might find that ridiculous. But ancient Greeks would have seen their own lives in that story. Sometimes no matter how well you do, the situation just isn't on your side. Even the gods can't always be in your corner. And yet you still have to try your best. Now let's talk about how they actually spoke to the gods. When we think of prayer today, we picture someone alone, quietly. Eyes closed, hands folded, in a church or a temple or a bedroom. Greek prayer looked nothing like that. It involved blood. Animal sacrifice was at the center of ancient Greek religion. Bulls, goats, pigs. These animals were offered to the gods. But this was not simply slaughter. It was an elaborate and genuinely beautiful ritual. The animal chosen as the offering had to be without flaw. It was decorated with ribbons. Its horns were gilded. The people formed a procession and walked to the altar, with flute players leading the way. When they arrived, everyone washed their hands. Barley was scattered, and then a silence fell. Not because anyone gave the signal. Everyone just went quiet at the same moment. The merchant who had been haggling in the market. The mother who had been soothing her child. For that one instant, everyone looked in the same direction. The smell of roasting meat and smoke and the sound of flutes. all mixed in the air. And what the people were silently wishing for probably had nothing to do with theology. Let the harvest go well this year. Let my child stay healthy. Let there be no war. In that silence, the one leading the ceremony raised both arms toward the sky and began to pray. When the animal died, the women present let out a sharp ritual cry. This was not an emotional outburst. It was part of the ceremony itself. A recognition of the weight of a life ending. A witness to that life crossing over to the divine. In major public sacrifices, certain parts of the animal were burned on the altar as an offering to the gods. The rest of the meat was shared among everyone present. The sacred offering and the communal feast were the same event. Worshipping a god and breaking bread together were not two separate things. Here's an important question. Why offer food to a god who isn't hungry? The Greeks would have answered it like this. The sacrifice isn't for the god. It's for us. Through the act of making an offering, we confirm our relationship with the divine, we come together as a community. And we remind ourselves of our place in the world. We are not gods. We are fragile and finite, and nature can bring us to our knees at any moment. The sacrifice was how they made sure they never forgot that. Now, about the priests. You might assume ancient Greece had powerful priests who interpreted the will of the gods, delivered moral teachings, and set the spiritual standards for everyone. But the reality was quite different. Greek priests were not the towering religious authorities we might imagine. Most of them were something more like local officials in charge of a specific temple's rituals. Some were appointed by the city. Some inherited the role through their family. Some served for a fixed period and then returned to ordinary life. Nobody held a monopoly on the will of the gods. There was no spiritual hierarchy handing down divine truth. No one could forgive your sins or claim sole authority over what the gods wanted. So who did speak for the gods? The oracles did. And none was more famous than the Oracle at Delphi. At the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, a priestess known as the Pythia would deliver messages from the god. Should we go to war? Should we found a new colony? Should I get married? From kings to ordinary citizens, people came to Delphi before making any decision that truly mattered. But the Pythia's answers had a notable quality. They were often vague, or more precisely, they were open enough for the person listening to pour their own desires into them. Croesus, the king of Lydia, asked whether he should go to war against Persia. The Pythia answered, if you start this war, a great empire will fall. Croesus was overjoyed. He assumed it meant Persia would be destroyed. He launched the war. The empire that fell was his own. Most of the people who made that journey to Delphi probably already had their answer. The decision was already made inside them. They just wanted to hear it confirmed in the language of a god. Croesus already wanted to fight. When he heard that a great empire would fall, he heard what he was hoping to hear. The real power of the oracle wasn't its mystery. It was that it understood, with frightening precision, that people only ever truly hear what they want to hear. The oracle never lied. It just didn't say which empire. Now let's talk about the festivals. The Greek calendar was essentially a long chain of celebrations. Every city, every god, had their own festival. And those festivals filled the year. The Panathenaea was Athens's biggest. Held in honor of the goddess Athena, it came in two forms. A smaller annual festival and a grand festival every 4 years, which lasted 10 full days. Feasts in the city square, athletic contests, poetry recitations, a massive procession up to the Acropolis. Hundreds of cattle were sacrificed. And the meat was shared across the entire city. For 10 days, the whole city moved through a haze of cooking fires and music and noise, an entire city feeling, for a moment, like one body. But there was another festival, even more fascinating. The Thesmophoria was open only to women. Men were completely excluded. For 3 days, women stepped outside their daily lives and gathered at the sanctuary of the goddess Demeter. What happened inside is still not fully known, because the women who participated kept it to themselves. What little we have comes mostly from men speculating from the outside. Women who, in ordinary life, were expected to stay home and fulfill their given roles, stepped away from the male gaze for those few days and gathered only with each other. We don't know what was said, but that silence itself says something. The more you think about how little we know, the more clearly you sense how free that time must have felt. Women in ancient Greek society lived under enormous restrictions. Their presence in public life was nearly invisible. The Thesmophoria must have been a chance to breathe. We should talk about death. Where did ancient Greeks think they went when they died? At least in the early picture Homer gives us, the underworld is nothing like the paradise. Many traditions promise it was a dim and shadowy world, where the dead wandered as pale reflections of who they once were. Over time, ideas like Elysium, a place of bliss for favored heroes, began to take shape. But for many Greeks, what waited after death was fundamentally bleak. To reach the underworld, you had to cross the river Styx. And you had to pay the ferryman Charon. That's why some burials included a coin placed with the body. Not every burial, and not always in the same spot. But the practice existed and endured for a long time, and what it tells us is something simple and deeply human. I don't want to send you there empty-handed. At least let me give you something for the crossing. That's not theology, that's just love. Whether you're living in ancient Greece or right now, the things people do at the very end tend to look the same. There's a scene where Odysseus descends to the underworld and meets the heroes already gone. When he encounters the soul of Achilles, he tries to offer comfort. You're remembered as the greatest of all heroes, even in death. You rule down here like a king. I almost envy you. And do you know what Achilles says back? He says he would rather be the lowest servant alive on earth than a king among the dead. Life is better than death. No question. That was the temperature of Homer's underworld. But some believe this dark fate could be changed by being initiated into a mystery cult. The Eleusinian Mysteries were held at a place called Eleusis, near Athens. Centered on the myth of Demeter and her daughter Persephone, the rites promised initiates a better existence after death. These mysteries were remarkably well known throughout Athenian society. Many Athenians and people from across the Greek world took part in them. They were secret rites that the entire Greek world knew existed. Those who participated drank a ritual beverage called kaikon, said to be made from barley, water, and mint. Some researchers have raised the possibility that it may have contained something that heightened the experience, though this remains unproven. What we can say with more confidence is what the ancient sources tell us. These rites were believed to dissolve the fear of death and leave initiates with a powerful sense of hope about what came after. We don't know what happened inside on those nights. We still don't, after all this time. And somehow that makes it feel more real. The things that matter most tend to leave silence, not explanations. The fact that so many people kept the secret so completely, for so long, might itself be evidence that what happened, there was something that couldn't be put into words. There's one more thing worth exploring here. We tend to think of ancient Greece as the birthplace of reason. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the land of logic. But when you actually read the philosophers themselves, a very different world opens up. In Plato's dialogues, there's a concept he calls divine madness. He argues that there are truths reason simply cannot reach, truths that can only be experienced in a state of ecstasy given directly by the gods. The moment you look at someone beautiful, and your soul is seized by something you can't control. The moment you stand in front of a perfect sunset and feel completely undone. Plato said those are the moments when a human being comes closest to the divine. Isn't it striking that Plato, of all people, said something like that? This is exactly where we tend to misread ancient Greece. When we frame it as the rational foundation of Western philosophy, we miss the mystical current running underneath all of it. But without that current, half the philosophy is simply incomprehensible. Sacrifice, oracles, festivals, mystery rites, philosophy. To the ancient Greeks, these were never separate things. The way they honored the gods, the way they understood the world, and the way they shared a meal were all woven together into one unbroken fabric. Religion wasn't a part of life. Religion was life. It wasn't something you went somewhere to do at a certain hour. From the moment you woke up to the moment you died, every part of your life was something the gods were involved in. That's the deepest difference between their world and ours. Today, religion is a choice. You can believe or not believe. And even if you do believe, that belief often lives in a specific place. at a specific time, separate from everything else. For ancient Greeks, that kind of separation didn't exist. The world was full of gods. Saying you didn't believe in them would have been like saying you didn't believe in air, and then that world ended. In the late 4th century, under the policies of a Christian empire, the traditional rites were increasingly restricted and slowly dismantled. Temples became churches. The old gods were reframed as false idols, as demons, as things to be left behind. Some places changed quickly, others held on longer. The most symbolic moment in that long transition came in 529. When the last philosophical school in Athens closed its doors. The final formal institution carrying an unbroken tradition was gone. But it didn't disappear entirely. The myths are still in the books. The stone columns of the temples are still standing. And even today, in Greece, there are people who make offerings to those ancient gods once more. A small number, but they believe it is no accident that these names have survived for thousands of years. Zeus, Hera, Aphrodite, Poseidon. Why do these names still feel alive to us? It's not just because they're old stories. It's because those stories carry something human beings cannot escape. Jealousy, rage, love, the fear of death, the will to keep living anyway. The gods had all of those things. Not because the gods were modeled after humans, but because the humans who created them looked honestly at everything inside themselves and refused to look away. That honesty is why, after thousands of years, none of it has disappeared.